Hey guys, what's going on? Paul here, and back with another Cardano live stream. Great to be joined by Farid from Dapp Central once again. Farid, thanks for taking the time to come on.
Not a problem, Paul. Happy to be here. I am feeling a little bit under the weather, so for anybody watching this, if I do sound a little bit different, I do apologize for that. But as always, Paul, good to see your face and good to be joining you here as part of this live stream.
Yeah, look, I really appreciate you joining when you're not feeling 100%. So we'll try and make it quicker today. Generally, when we start talking about Cardano and different things, though, it does tend to go on a bit. But anyone new to the streams here, drop a comment, let us know where you're coming in from. Share it out if you want to really help bring more people in. The way I look at it is the more people come in, ask questions, let the audience drive part of the conversation. We have our topics to cover, and then whatever else anyone wants to talk about, we'll try and integrate that into the conversation too. So, see, we have David and we have CBD Suddy, two regulars at this point for nearly any videos I put out here. The main topics are, I suppose, look, the day that's in it with World Mobile, I had to wear the t-shirt of the Aerostat. So World Mobile have launched their first Aerostat. Actually, I probably should have had, I'll bring up an image of it after, but they launched the first Aerostat in Mozambique. This is something that has been highly anticipated. It's, I'd say the first of many. You talked, I seen a snippet. I showed it actually in my weekly summary last week, the snippet you had up with Mickey about that we might see one in the US before we see another one in Africa. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure thing. So that was the second time that I got to hang out with Mickey. And the more I just hang around him, the more I just kind of like him, right? He's super personable. And what I love about each of the interviews that I've had with him so far has just been the amount of alpha he's dropped along the way. He is a great speaker, super motivational, and I can see why the World Mobile community has grown to the size that it has. Now, to that end, when I sat down with him, this was before the actual confirmation of the Aerostat launch. And so obviously, now that that has been confirmed, that was one of the questions that I had in my head preemptively that I wanted to ask him was, hey, once we get things up in Mozambique, where could we potentially see additional Aerostats? And during my first interview with him, he mentioned the fact that World Mobile is now going to be focusing on the United States, right? They have the Swiss cheese problem, as he likes to call it, where while the majority of the people here in the US are connected, there's still a pretty big gap with respect to some of the rural areas. And so that was one of the questions that I asked him. And he said that moving forward, that he expects to see an Aerostat within, I believe, the United States before we see another one launching in Africa. Now, I know that the team has been working very hard to get an Aerostat up, I believe, within the Zanzibar region. And that has, kind of slowed down. And initially, that's, I think, where I thought that the Aerostat would have gone out. But we got the confirmation earlier today that it was in Mozambique. And so my thing is going to be now with the announcement of them partnering up with an ISP, I believe, in Oregon. They also had a test flight, which took place in New Hampshire, that we may see, a rollout of an Aerostat in either of those two states. Now, again, this is just speculation on my end, but I'm really excited just at the fact that they finally got one up. And I think that moving forward, as more people see, okay, hey, they've actually got one up in Africa, that they'll then be less hesitant to say, okay, maybe we want to be the second place, or maybe we want to be the second country that gets adoption for World Mobile, right? I always say, I think even just with content, for example, you create your first piece of content, you look at, your 100th, 200th, 300th piece of content, it's much easier. And I think we're going to see the same exact thing with these Aerostats, where the first one is going to be the hardest. Number 2, number 3, number 10, number 100. When we get to that point, I think at that point will just be super easy. So just my thoughts surrounding that. Hopefully we can get more alpha from Mickey, but I'm not sure that there's any other events short of the Cardano summit. So I am planning on attending. If I can sit down with Mickey, then I'll be asking him where we could potentially see and hopefully get more clarity surrounding that.
Nice. Yeah, it's I think they were waiting on a lot of different locations to figure out which one was going to be first. I know it's a while now since I talked to Mickey, maybe 2 months back, or definitely over a month ago, he was on the channel and we were talking about different things. And he said there was lots of moving parts. They weren't sure at that stage which would be the first to get across the line, but he thought that once the first went across, the other one probably wouldn't be that far behind. And I agree on it's great to have the first up there, and it will be a sign to others that this is what happens. This is how it all actually works. And I suppose the next few weeks will tell a lot too, as this starts to get used and people get to see what it can actually do. That will really be incentive for others to follow suit. And hopefully we see more of these. Now, I've seen in maybe it was in your video as well, he was talking about the cost of them. They're not cheap to put together. Was it 1.5 million or something like that to get one of these built and put up there? So that is a factor as well in going into new locations. And just for anyone that hasn't seen it, that was the image there, just to show what it actually looks like. It's hard to look at the scale there, but there might be more images coming out over the next few days, and I'm sure they'll have some video content of it actually launching too. But coming back to, let's see what's in the comments. Are the aerostats tethered in place, or do they roam free? And if so, how does that go? As far as I know, they're tethered in place. And if we look at the image here, actually, I'll move this one off. You can see that there is lines. We're sitting in the way of that one. It does look to be tethered down here to the ground. So I would presume they have to be tethered, because as far as I'm aware, there isn't any drive feature in them or anything like that. So they are just floated up into the air, and they have to be to one spot. And then in areas that might get really bad weather, I think there's the ability to pull them in if there is heavy storms or anything like that, just to be on the safe side. What else did I miss here? Thoughts on the cost per megabyte? I actually can't think offhand what the cost was. That probably brings us on to maybe the eSIM. But have you looked at the costs, Farid? I'll look it up here actually in a second, but maybe you know offhand.
Yeah, I did. So, and this is just with the eSIM, not whatever else is going up with the Aerostat. And so I actually posed a question to my community to ask them if they thought that those data rates were comparable to what they had in their community, or if they were somewhat expensive, right? So World Mobile has 3 packages. The first is going to be 1 gigabyte for 14 days for $8.50 US. The second is going to be 5 gigabytes for 60 days for $30 US. And then the third is 10 gigabytes of data for 90 days for $50 US. There you go. Perfect. And in my local area, for a hotspot with AT&T, who's one of the largest data providers in the United States, they have a package that allows for you to get, I believe it's 50 gigabytes of hotspot data, right? So it's not necessarily just your regular phone plan, but it's for hotspot data. And I believe that goes for about $70 to $75 a month. So in my local country or my local area, I would say that these are somewhat comparable. Now, the comments that I received tended to say that in my local area, this is expensive. And so I think World Mobile has to have their rates obviously be enough to keep the platform running, but they also need to be cheap enough to be, what is the word that I'm looking for here? Competitive, right? If they're too high, people aren't going to join. But if they're too low, then there's not enough revenue for World Mobile, right? At the end of the day, they're a for-profit business. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And so 10 gigabytes for 90 days, again, while it does seem to be somewhat expensive, I would think that over time, as we get better infrastructure and as we just get more accessibility towards these products, that the price would go down. But generally speaking, from what I saw in my comments, people were saying, hey, this is expensive compared to where I'm living. So that is one piece of feedback that I would definitely like to share with the World Mobile team, and potentially ask Mickey the next time I have an opportunity to meet with him is, hey, how can you guys make this even more affordable than it is right now?
Yeah, I hadn't broke down the costs or anything like that yet. And for me, I have landline, I have fiber to my home, which I'm lucky enough to have here. So that gives me 1 gig download speeds for, I think it's about €45 per month. I know that's different here. I have unlimited and stuff like that. So I've never used an eSIM, or some people look at them as travel SIMs. If you're traveling for work or for holidays, picking up some of these so that you can use that data if it's not included in your package. But it's definitely something I'll try and dig into and maybe compare with other competitors that are out there. And like you said there, it's a balancing act between getting the cost low enough for people using it and also covering their costs, because this isn't just going to be on the World Mobile Network. They will be using other providers when you're in certain countries, and they will have costs on the data that I suppose their subscribers actually use. So definitely good questions for Mickey the next time, and one that I need to do a bit of research on too. So what else we got in the comments before we go from from World Mobile? If the aerostats are always tethered, why create complex aerostats versus trading towers? I don't know their exact reasoning. My understanding would be, and I suppose CBD has some of it there, about that they're easier to move. So you can go to new locations. If you don't need it in that location anymore, it can be moved. Also, these things can probably go a lot higher than you can build your tower. By the time you would build your tower to these heights, it's not going to be that cheap either. And then you don't have the flexibility. If something's wrong with it, you can just pull it in and get it fixed rather than sending people up some fairly high heights to fix it. Maybe there's other reasons, Farid, that you're aware of.
Yeah, I would say trial and error, right? Imagine building a tower, which is fixed, in an area where you think you might get the user base that you want, only to find out that you don't, right? Being able to, like you said, pull the aerostat down, move it to a separate location, and then put it up and then try again, I think is what is the word that I'm looking for here? You can't put a price on that, right? They could potentially say, okay, hey, maybe we've had this aerostat flying in Mozambique for 2 months and we're not seeing the output that we want to, and we want to just take it and go ahead and reuse it somewhere else. And so I think that is one of the biggest benefits that you get with the mobility of the aerostat. And to just kind of backtrack a little bit, I did want to add this final comment surrounding the aerostats in general. So far, we've seen the stats when it comes to air nodes, excuse me. Now I'm getting tongue tied. But I'm really interested to see what kind of stats we get with the aerostat, given the fact that just a single aerostat, I believe I read on the website, can connect up to 100,000 users. So far in Zanzibar, with 460 plus air nodes, there's been, I think, a total of like 15 to anywhere between 20,000 people that have been able to connect to the network over a 24-hour period. But it's really kind of fascinating to me that one single aerostat could potentially cover 4 or 5 times that amount, right? With just one piece of infrastructure, as opposed to the number of air nodes on the ground. Now, granted, Mickey did mention this in my interview as well, that it's not just focusing on aerostats versus air nodes, but the network is going to be a hybrid network where, on the ground, because of the speed that the air nodes provide, that you'll be able to connect to that. But if there aren't any, then you can then kind of fall back on the coverage of the aerostat. So I think it's really cool to see all the stats that we've seen so far with air nodes, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of stats we can pull and what stats the team is going to be sharing with us when it comes to the aerostat. And then the very last thing I wanted to just add was just going to be surrounding security. So I think it's always, great to highlight the wins and just the progress that the team has made. But one thing that comes to mind for me with aerostats is, because they're somewhat exposed, right, will be the security of them, and seeing, obviously some people may not be keen to having them in their local areas, but to see, how well do they fare with people potentially trying to do malicious things to them. And so really just trying to see, how does the team secure these moving forward and make sure that nothing bad happens to them flying in the air.
Yeah, and on that as well, this is the first test for the, now I'm getting tongue tied on the aerostat air node on the aerostat, and then as you said, there'll be a lot of data comes back from this, and then we can see at the minute there's 461 air nodes. I think it's great to see that number going up. It's probably been slower than people would have liked to have seen, but with the sales coming up, the air node sales coming up in the next, I don't know when that is that must be soon. I remember seeing announcements about that recently. Then I think that will really scale it up, and that's when people can come in and start actually earning from the network too. And like you were saying there about people maybe damaging them, it's, I suppose that's built into the sharing economy, and that if people have one of them on their own building, then it's in their best interest to keep it in working order, because the longer it's up running and working, then the more they can earn off it. And it's about trying to really push that out. So I think we've covered most of World Mobile there that we're going to. Hey, Kaizen was out in Dubai there. We'll have to catch up at some point, Kaizen, for a show too. He was out at Crypto Expo in Dubai with Discover Cardano, out with Dave. Really, really good show they put on there. Adios. And yeah, so I think we're caught up on questions. You mentioned the summit there. Are you going to Dubai, or it's not looking likely for me, unfortunately, but I know you were considering it too.
Yeah, so this would be my first ever summit in person. I've never been to Dubai. So I was thinking of, just doing like a 2-in-1, right? Making a vacation out of it and also getting to enjoy the summit. And if Kaizen is there, which I believe he is now, I'd love to get to meet up with him and maybe have him show us, a spin of the city. There's just been so many things that I've heard about Dubai, but to have somebody that's actually local there to show you, I think really makes it that much more memorable and that much more enjoyable. So right now it's in like 80-20. I'm just waiting. I've been looking at the flights. They're not cheap by any means. And so I'm just like hoping to catch a pretty cheap one. And if I can get one of those, I'll definitely just book it on the spot. But I am looking forward to it. And I wanted to just add one last comment surrounding World Mobile before we move things along. With Operation Air Notes, I do believe that the platform will be coming along very soon. I'm set to have an interview with one of the members from the team to touch on that and hopefully bring out some alpha surrounding that as well. So stay tuned for that. I'm not sure how much more I can share, but I know that Op-An is extremely close at this point.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and actually, just in case anyone isn't subscribed, Farid's channel is the first link in the description too. So make sure you are. But I'm sure everyone watching here probably is already. But moving on then, so NFTxLV, another mouthful. You were at that the weekend before last. Now at this point, I think, how was it? Again, lots of FOMO, sitting at home watching across social media, but how was the event, or how was the turnout this year?
So overall, the event was amazing. I enjoyed myself. I realized that coming to these events as a content creator, it offers a different perspective as just somebody who's attending it, not creating content, because I realize now that creating content is basically a full-time job. But overall, the turnout was, and I'll be fair here, it was a little bit lower, I think, in my eyes than it was last year. Now, granted, the turnout for Rare Evo the month before, I also think was slightly less compared to last year. So I don't think it's a specific thing with NFTLV. I think it's just where we are with the current market. And I think that as the next bull cycle comes around, that we'll see some of these events gaining more and more traction as people have more liquidity to deploy and just to attend at these events. It was really great overall. Got to see Charles, got to meet Tim Harrison, got to meet, I think it's Tamara. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, head of IOG. Got to hang out with JJ, got to meet the Cornucopias guys again. It's always a blast hanging out with Rob and Josh. We shot Copy Cafe 68 in person, which if you guys missed that particular episode, definitely head over to the official Cornucopias channel to check that out. We had like 15 different guests on. It was literally like a roundtable experience where we had Rick McCracken, Patrick Tobler, even Mickey stopped by to talk about his experience at the Cornucopias booth. We had Goofy Crisp there, who was handing out samples of the Snack energy drink, which that was a little bit of alpha, right? Because they're finally getting their first edition out in terms of like mainstream to people who ordered it about a month or two ago. There was also the Clay Nation team, Lena and Izzy, who were there. Always wonderful to chat and just catch up with. Ryan Jones from Noom, Sean Roller from Noom as well as Jir Wallet. I sat down with him and we talked about what they got in the works. And then there were just so many smaller name projects that were there in attendance as well. So that was really exciting to talk to people that don't necessarily have the reputation that some of these other bigger projects have, but they're trying to get their name out there. And so I would just encourage anybody who didn't attend this year, definitely, schedule it for next year. I enjoyed it, not only talking to projects, but also even seeing other content creators. I met Josh from Lake Game Crypto there. the duo from Cheeky Crypto, Nick and Chris. They actually sat me down for an interview on their channel, which was the first time that I was being interviewed, which was really interesting, right? Because I was talking about my story coming into crypto and just content creation as a whole. But to sum it up again, man, really enjoyable experience. The cool thing about World Mobile was that they actually had their booth integrated with the Emergo, IOG, and Intersect booth as well. And so they got a lot of hype, a lot of eyeballs, which I think is now translating over into some of the price action that we've seen there for their token as well.
Yeah, that's definitely been nice to see for World Mobile from someone who bought into the original sale and have held since then. But on the turnouts, yeah, I don't think the turnouts at the minute are a reflection on the actual events. From everything I've seen, both Rare Evo and NFTxLV looks to have really scaled up the show that they've put on this year, and really put a lot more work into it. And it is down to the market. And even for me and Dubai and everything like that, the markets are a big reason that you're not just saying straight away, yes, I'm going. Because if you're looking at going to these events, it means that you either have to sell a decent amount of crypto or you can't use them funds to buy into crypto. So it's a balancing act for people at the minute. And I suppose there probably wasn't too many people at them events, was non-US people at them two events this year with the way things are.
Yeah, I think the majority were within the US. And that kind of sparked the thought in my head. I'm wondering what the turnout in Dubai is going to be like, right? I think two of the biggest powerhouses are going to be like the European region and then the US when it comes to crypto. And the fact that the summit's going to be in Dubai with the current conditions and the trend that we've seen with the first two events, right? I'm like, well, let's see how this particular turnout in Dubai compares to Lausanne, Switzerland last year. So that's going to be one that I'm keeping an eye out on. But I want to just give a quick shout out to one of the viewers on my channel, which I think he's also a viewer of your channel as well. His name is Eric Threadgill. He drove over 1,200 miles from Oklahoma to attend the event. And he actually brought me a gift. He brought Mickey a gift, and he also brought Rob from Cornucopias his gift as well. So I just wanted to just shout out the Cardano community. You know, this is what really keeps us knit. People that are so selfless like Eric that, you know, turn out to these events with the expectation of, you know, meeting people, talking with people, networking, and then giving back, right, to people that have poured into him as well to get him to the point that he's at here in this community. So overall, again, a really insightful event. I enjoyed it. But I think you're right. You know, a lot of the turnout was people that were already in the United States. There's already a pretty big Cardano community in Vegas. And so I think a lot of them were able to, you know, literally drive down maybe a couple of miles and tune into the event. And I feel like it was kind of a similar thing with Rare Evo, where there's a pretty big community already established within the Denver area. And so they didn't really have to go too far out of their way. But I'll be watching to see the turnout in Dubai.
Yeah, Dubai would be easier for me to get to. I can get a direct flight to Dubai. It's still a long flight. I don't know, is it 9-10 hours or something? But to go to the US to either of the events, it would have been two flights, which you probably need two flights to get to Dubai, do you?
Yeah, I do. It's a total trip of 20 to 24 hours. So I'm not excited about that.
Okay.
But again, it's not an opportunity that I think I'm going to get, you know, again in the near future. So I want to really capitalize on that. I know that the summit takes place in different countries every single year, and you know, to be able to not only just visit Dubai but connect with Cardano community members, especially like you mentioned Kaizen earlier, who's already out there, I think is an opportunity that I personally don't want to miss.
Yeah, it would be a really great experience to be out there. Lausanne last year was the first ever in-person event I went to, and it really is a great experience to get out there and meet people. And it's crazy. The time just flew by. You're talking to one person, you turn around, and then you're talking to someone else. And I didn't get to see nearly any of the presentations actually at it, because it was either talking to people or interviewing people. But really, really great experience. And like you said there, Eric, he's a really good guy in the community, seen around Twitter, seen around the comments in videos as well. And people like that are great to have in the community. So just one more comment on World Mobile. Thought the prices were pretty high for World Mobile, but if you're in the middle of Africa, tribe somewhere remote, then I think I would pay for it. Hopefully they get an unlimited data plan. Yeah, I don't know if the eSIM, I could be wrong. I'm not sure if the eSIM is targeted at connect remote areas just yet, because it does need to be able to connect to something to get the data. Or I think more so what they're trying to do with the likes of the aerostats and things like that are to really connect more remote areas. And I see a comment there on IOG and SIP 1694. We might get to that after. I won't bring it up just yet, but we'll continue on with NFTxLV first. But what were the standout projects? I know from watching the videos, Cornucopias, the racing was definitely looked like a standout. They always put on a good show. The same last year they went, and I think that was the first view people got of walking around in the metaverse. But this year we could actually, or not we, anyone there could actually race as part of the experience too. How was that?
It was really exhilarating. The quality has always stood out to me when it comes to cornucopias. Now, I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I always talk about cornucopias. I want to maybe highlight a few other projects, but the biggest thing that I really enjoyed about the cornucopias booth this year was the multiplayer racing. So last year they had racing, but it was just on separate or through separate stations. So you weren't able to actually race with the person sitting to the left of you or to the right of you. This year they had, I believe it was up to, don't quote me on this, I want to say 8 to 16 different players that could be in a particular race together. So that was a really cool experience. Again, the quality and the seamlessness, right? So they've built out Solace, which is one area where you're able to kind of free roam. If you're an OG, you have access to that right now. But to then see how you can then go from one area into the racing, which ties directly into another portion of the game, was really cool. So it's not like they've segmented the game out, but they've really made it seem as if it's all one gigantic metaverse. And so that, I think, was really eye-opening for me. The approach that this team is taking to delivering and their quality has always stood out. So that's going to be it for the Copy talk there. Now, the other standout project that I really enjoyed stopping by and chatting with was actually going to be a competitor. Now, there's two of them, and they were both within the gaming scene. So the first one I'm going to highlight is going to be the Virtua team. So last year, they actually brought out a Shelby Mustang, and they had one of the people that designed the vehicle actually on stage with Charles to talk about their partnership with the Virtua team. And what was really cool was that this year, the Virtua team actually brought out their own racing as well. So I was able to check that out. I was able to actually use that same exact Shelby that they displayed last year in their racing game. So we had Cornucopias bring out racing. And very interestingly, we had the Virtua team also bring out their racing for people to test out. Now, the Virtua team only brought out, I believe it was just one television, so there wasn't any multiplayer. But nonetheless, it was really good to see that they're also bringing out a new aspect for the community to try out. Now, the second competitor to Cornucopias that I saw there was going to be the Reflex or the Reflect team. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But we had Unpopular L, and we had some other team members there talking about, what Reflex is doing. And up until that event, I really wasn't sure that they were building. But when I saw what they had on display, they had a couple different games. They had like a Street Fighter type game where you were like one person on the left, one person on the right, and you're able to kind of fight each other. Really reminded me of Tekken, if anybody's played a game like that. But the really big highlight that they had there was they had this machine that actually allowed for you to stand in the middle. And for anybody who's been through TSA in the United States, you kind of have to put your hands up and you get this like little X-ray thing that kind of goes around you and it scans you. But they had a very similar machine to that, which would actually draw you in their sort of game engine, which was really cool to see that like these guys had so much stuff already built out. A lot of projects that come into the space, they're very early and you have to wait a long time to start to see results. But what really struck me with Reflect or Reflects, I'm not sure again how to pronounce it, was just how much they already had built out. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out on them. I know that they made a lot of headlines during their Catalyst proposal launch, and then they subsequently withdrew their Catalyst proposal launch or their Catalyst proposal. But after seeing what they've built out, I'm kind of second guessing that, maybe they do deserve some funding. I'm not sure if they deserve the millions of ADA that they initially requested, but seeing that they already had tangible products was very reassuring for myself.
Yeah, they're two projects I haven't checked in on in a while. Virtua, it's well over a year ago that I had an interview with the team to talk about what they were doing, and they're cross-chain. So they were first on Ethereum and then coming into Cardano. The racing haven't seen yet. I think I've seen a video on Twitter, but haven't watched the full thing. that's one. I'm taking notes here of timestamps, but also things for me to go and look up after this. But on Reflect, I didn't like that. I thought they were more an investment side, investing in other projects, and didn't realize they were actually building games themselves. It's one that I don't think they've done much marketing yet to talk about things like that. And Tekken was definitely one of the games I played when I was younger. Really, really good game at the time on PlayStation. I think I had it on PlayStation 1 maybe when it came out first. But that's one I'd like to get into. I did see videos as well of people being in the thing that was scanning them. And was that taking a full 3D render of people to make avatars in games then, was it?
That's exactly what it was doing. I couldn't think of the word, but you just literally said it right there. And so yeah, I think they mentioned that they scanned up to like 200 to 300 plus people there, because again, it wasn't something that you typically see at these conferences, and so people want to see, you know, what the experience was like and what they would look like on the other. And so again, really eye-opening experience into Tekken. Your comment about that, did you play as Paul, the actual character?
I probably did at some point. Yeah, I think I played with most characters in it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
That's why I played that a lot more than say Street Fighter or things like that. It was because I had PlayStation and didn't have was Street Fighter on Sega originally. So
Yep.
I didn't have that. I had friends who had that, so I could only play it when I went there. But I had Tekken and Crash Bandicoot and games like that at home. I suppose actually Wipeout, which there's some similarities to Cornucopias now with Wipeout, or it was a Wipeout. Can't think of the full. There was a few numbers after it, but it was like that. It was a flying car or spaceship at that time. So
Yeah.
makes me want to dig out some of them games now, talking about them. But what else on the, I suppose, smaller project side that don't get the airtime? Which ones turned up there and put in the effort to be there and try and interact with the community that probably don't deserve deserve a lot more spotlight than they generally get?
Yeah, there's two that come to my mind, and again, they're competitors. I'm not trying to pit anybody against each other, but one of them, and I'll start off with the somewhat bigger one, is going to be cswap, right? So for anybody who's not aware, cswap is going to be, and I believe this is what they advertise themselves as, is a DEX, but for NFTs. So, you know, on platforms, for example, like jpeg.store, they have people that come, they list their asset, and you have to have somebody else on the other end who's actually willing to buy that asset. And so sometimes you might go to, you know, make a sale and you have to wait around for a little bit. What cswap is doing is they're bringing liquidity pools to NFT collections, basically allowing for instantaneous swaps for anybody who's looking to sell their NFT. And then if you're looking to buy an NFT, it also makes it super, super quick and super simple. And so one of the founders from cswap, it was actually really interesting, had Charles Hoskinson come by the main stage, which was like the IOG booth. And they basically set up a demo for cswap where Charles was there and giving his insight as to, you know, how easy and the opportunities that a platform like cswap is bringing to the market. For anybody who's not aware, jpeg.store right now has the majority of the market share, and they've been a force to be reckoned with. But I think to see platforms like cswap, who aren't necessarily at the forefront, but they're looking to be with innovative ideas like this, was really good to see, right? And so to see Charles supporting them, to see the people that stopped by because of Charles's presence there, I think really brought a lot of eyeballs to them. And then to that end, there was also Rob, not Rob from Cornucopias, but another Rob from a platform called Lava. It's spelled L4VA, but they're basically looking to do the same exact thing like cswap is doing, but they're also looking to add auctions for NFTs. And so their goal is to basically make it so that for anybody who wants to get in and out of a particular NFT project, that they don't have to undercut people at the floor price in order to get that quick liquidity. And so again, very similar idea to what cswap is doing, but they're still building right now. I believe they're aiming to have a product out early in Q1 of 2024. So I sat down with Rob, and I've got an interview that I'll be releasing in the next couple of days, basically highlighting that. But those are two projects that I personally think need more attention. Again, given the fact that JPEG just right now has a really big stronghold on the market, but it's not to say that they don't deserve it, right? But I think that some of these smaller platforms are bringing innovative ideas that deserve just as much attention as some of the bigger players in the ecosystem right now.
Yeah, it's cswap I had heard of, and the lava, that one I hadn't heard of before. Cardano Thor actually put out a really good thread just after the JPEG token launched, with loads of different NFT marketplaces and different things that they were all doing individually. And it's good. It drives competition like that, drives innovation. Now there's a lot of NFT marketplaces out there, and JPEG Store have the massive majority of liquidity right now, and things like that. That liquidity pools, that's something that is a really good aspect, because it can sometimes, when you need to sell your NFT, you need funds for something. You either have to come in and completely undercut the market and hope that someone comes in and buys it up. But if there's liquidity pools, you can come in and you can just sell. You know straight away what the price is. You're not undercutting everything else and dragging the price down to try and get some liquidity out of it. So the more products like that, the better. And was it Dropshot, I think, had a feature where I could put in my liquidity. So I put in 1,000 data, and I'm willing to buy an NFT from whatever 4 or 5 different collections. And whichever one the floor price hits first, then my order gets executed. Things like that, that I don't have to lock in my liquidity into one particular buy. Things like that are really good. And hopefully we see more marketplaces doing that. And even with a lot of these, getting one on top, so one that basically aggregates them, that I can go in and I'm looking at a collection on whatever it is, Marketplace X. I think there's some of them, Jam on Bread do it, and there is another one as well. I can't think of the name, but you can go into them and you see all the NFTs, and you can go in and buy through that. And you might be actually buying from JPEG Store, you might be buying from something else. So it's great to see stuff like that.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's going to be the next iteration, or at least the next push in my eyes for marketplaces, right? Just like we saw with dexes, you could come on a single dex, use it like you wish, and then now we're kind of maturing to take a look at dex aggregators, that are looking across multiple dexes. So I think what you just said there with Jam on Bread and some of these other marketplaces that basically say, hey, we want traffic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just on our platform. Even if they just get just a cut, right, by
mhm.
providing or leading people to the right marketplace that has the best offer for them, I think it's a win-win. So I think that's going to be the next big push, is once we start to see maturity within the marketplace space, is going to be a single marketplace that aggregates, or at least looks over the majority of marketplaces, to then give the user the best price. At the end of the day, it's, I think, making the user experience the best for the end user. But if the marketplace can at least get a cut for pointing somebody to the right place, I think it's a win-win for everybody. The end user gets the best price, and all the marketplaces involved at least get some liquidity coming their way.
Yeah, it's a way for them to become, eventually, if they're doing that and there's enough people using them, then they start to become the place that people want to go, and then they will go and start listing their NFTs with them. So it's a great way for other competing NFT marketplaces to get in there and start gaining share, because once you become known as the place to go to, then people forget about going to the other ones as much and start going there to list their NFTs. And it's not the way I want to see the market going either. I'm saying that it should, because you look at with the JPEG Store, if we had that split, that there was 2 or 3 NFT marketplaces that all had a share of it, maybe 20, 30%, whatever it works out at each, and then you have the ones that can aggregate on top, then I think that's healthier for the overall ecosystem, and doesn't give a monopoly to just one marketplace. And not just NFTs, everything in general. Its competition is always good. But any other standouts from NFTxLV before we close out on that?
Yeah, I would just say we've touched, I think, mainly on like Dex and DeFi plays. Shout out to Clay Nation. They were there in attendance. Shout out to the Mallard Order, the Introverts team, Orimob or Ormob. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. A lot of really big NFT projects that I don't necessarily focus here on the channel, but I recognize them. And so to just see that there was a mix of both types of platforms, I think is great. And I would love to see these NFT projects also doing the same, right? Attending some of the DeFi events, for example, like Rare Evo, where that was mainly, platforms like Indigo, et cetera, that were there in attendance. And so I think getting a nice mix or a nice cross-pollination in the future would be great. But I wanted to just shout out some of those NFT projects as well, because I do think that they've carried the Cardano community space forward, especially in the times where we didn't have a lot of these DEXs and a lot of these DeFi protocols up and running.
Yeah, I think one big thing the NFT space has done is create some really solid communities out there. When you look at, they were here before we had trading of tokens and everything. They came, was it 2021, early 2021 with the Mary hard forks? That, I think that's when we had NFTs first. We had fungible tokens on Cardano. So they were the ones that really kicked things off first before we got into DeFi and DEXs and synthetics and everything else that brings. But one comment, we'll go back to it earlier on, was, will IOG Emergo retain control of the chain after SIP 1694? And this kind of ties into something we were talking about before and some of the negativity that's out there, I suppose, at the minute too. And this is just one aspect of it. There's loads of different threads and conversations that are part of the negativity. So not just singling this one out, but on my understanding is that right now there are 7 keys. So to make any parameter updates to Cardano, you need to control 5 out of the 7 to be able to make the changes or to sign off on the changes. IOG got 3 initially, Emergo got 2, and the Cardano Foundation got 2. So you need to, if IOG want to do the change, they need their own 3 keys, and then they need 2 keys from someone else. There's a bit of a debate, and part of the conversations on Twitter were over, does IOG have control of the 2 keys from Emergo? I thought I seen stuff at some stage saying that they were delegated or staked to IOG, that they could sign, so that when they brought out new releases of the node and different parameter updates, that they could sign them then, that they would be brought in on the chain. But I'm not sure. I've seen the opposite side of that as well. Charles coming out and saying they don't have control of it. But after SIP 1694, them keys that are used to update the chain should be burned, and they're no good anymore. So anything that needs to be updated has to be voted in. And that's what the whole Voltaire era would be, that governance, it is all on-chain governance. And that's the way things have to come in then to get signed off and get approved. I'm not sure how the process happens with SIP 1694. Say someone puts in a vote to change K to 2000 and it gets approved. Is that automatically done on chain, or is there someone has to come in and actually sign? Maybe SIP 1694 creates keys for that, or I don't know if you have any more insights to it, Farid.
Not to that end. I think what you said was very thorough, and I had the same idea. But I think that this is where we begin to see the Sancho net come into play, right? So the Sancho net is going to be basically the playground in preparation of SIP number 1694. And this is also where we begin to see the Intersect member-based organization come into play as well. So when I mentioned the IOG booth at NFTLV, that was done in partnership with IOG, of course, Emergo, and the Intersect MBO. So for anybody who's not aware, the MBO is going to be a platform where anybody in the community can join and basically have a say when it comes to the direction of Cardano. If you guys have not already checked out the official website, it's available at intersectmbo.org. And you can go and actually join the MBO. You can get signed up, put in your email, provide a little bit of information surrounding where you're coming in from. You know, are you a developer, just a regular everyday user, a project? You know, you can highlight what your interests are, etc. And as SIP 1694 comes online, I think we're going to start to see a slow phase out from IOG and Emergo calling the shots, to that then being done through some of these MBOs, specifically Intersect. And so, again, not much else to add to what you mentioned about the keys. I think it's interesting to see that play out and how that's going to kind of transition over. Obviously, just like with Catalyst, there's a million ways it could be done, right? But I'm kind of keen to see how it gets done and the way that the community is able to provide their feedback. But I think getting involved in things like the Sancho Net and Intersect MBO are going to be key for anybody who feels strongly about governance and making sure that their voice is heard once SIP number 1694 comes out and is then implemented.
Yeah, I haven't dived into the Sancho net yet. It's on the to-do list to try and get into it, and I think you can run a node in that as well to be a part of it and really test it out. So it's something I need to get into in the next few weeks and see how it all works. And I'll try and bring someone on as well that's been involved in them workshops and that is kind of deeper down that rabbit hole. It's something I'd like to learn a bit more about as well. But we talked just before briefly before we went live about there's a lot of negativity out there right now and part there was I seen discussions around this and there's good and bad to it and there's discussions around lots of different aspects out there. So I don't want it to be about any one individual thing, but I think at the core of it is it's the bear market. People are a lot more protective at this stage. They're people that have held from the bottom to the top and back down again. It's hard to look at that at times and think what could have been. And then if someone else is coming in saying something negative about your coin or your project or whatever it is, then it's very easy to get defensive about it. So I think there's both sides of this. There is people out there that will just try and spread FUD to set off the fireworks and sit back and watch the entertainment of people fighting and everything like that. But then there's genuine criticisms as well that sometimes get wrapped up in FUD. And I talked about this before, that not every question about a project or about anything is meant as FUD. It could be genuine questions, and we need to start identifying what is what. What is just someone genuinely trolling or trying to just spread shit about a project versus asking genuine questions that need to be answered, because lots of times it can help highlight things that are wrong, that should be addressed, or that maybe it is something that it's a perception people have, but it's actually completely wrong. So it's always good to try and get them genuine ones answered, but then just be able to just ignore the other stuff and not interact on it, because when them things kick off, it only breeds more and more kind of arguments, depression for people, and just it's a really negative. Like, you look at Twitter some days I go in, I look at it and I just sign off, because it's just like, it's not the mindset I want to get into getting involved in it. But what's your own perception? Because like me, I'm sure you're very active across different social medias trying to figure out what's going on and what's the latest.
Yeah, my perspective is that we just have to be more professional. And this is an approach that I try to take with my channel, right? There's millions of things that I could talk about, but I choose to just talk about things that bring the most value and the most, what's the way that I can put this? That's going to just be thought-provoking. Anybody can jump online because now everybody's connected to the internet, everybody has a voice, and just spew whatever they want to spew. And I think that some people that do that without thinking about the consequences are really, and maybe it's on purpose, so let me maybe just kind of walk that back. Maybe that's their intention, is to bring FUD. But I try not to, put that thought on people. My biggest thing is there's people on the sidelines that don't know any better. So when people put out these statements without fact checking, without making sure that it's accurate, there's people that see that, right, that believe that without having the full picture. That's the importance of always doing your own research. But when people are commenting about things that aren't publicly visible, for example, about people maybe selling at the top, there's no way to confirm that unless you actually own the account that potentially sold at the top. So even the person who's writing the tweet, unless they have access to those sorts of financials, they're just putting out what they think is the truth or what they heard from somebody else secondhand. And we have to be very careful, because that's how misinformation spreads. And I think platforms like Twitter are now starting to realize that. Facebook are starting to realize that. And they're now doing these things where they have like the little community notes at the very bottom, which say, hey, you're looking at this piece of news and something is digitally altered, or this is not accurate, this is just out of date. Granted, those things are being done at a very high level, right? But they're not being done for a Cardano post that's spreading misinformation. That's just flying low under the radar. So I think it's having a really bad side effect. We're already in the bear market. People are looking at their portfolios that are down 90%. The last thing they need to hear is some FUD that isn't confirmed about what somebody else thinks, because they're bitter about something that has happened or because they're personally involved in some sort of other situation. So my biggest thing would just be for people, like, if you have concerns, you can share those, but only if they're fact-based. If they're not fact-based, hey, do those on some sort of back channel, but you don't have to air out your dirty laundry and involve other people that are just trying to get by, especially after having endured the last 2 years alone, which have been super brutal, right? So the last thing we need to do is to have these conversations out in the open public. And for me, it's just really been eye-opening because I've always been one that's like, hey, if I don't have anything positive to say, I'm just not going to say it. If I'm not going to be providing something that's constructively or that is some sort of constructive criticism, I'm going to stay away. Everybody at the end of the day has their own opinion, but you don't have to blast it out there on some of these platforms that then repeat it to millions of other people that may not have the full picture. So I think we're walking a very fine line here. Obviously, nobody has the answer, but just a certain few. And it's interesting for me because I've really kind of come in during the bear market. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out to see how the conversations change as we go into the bull market. Do we still have this infighting going on? Do we still have these posts coming from people from the outside looking in? And then my last thing I wanted to say is this doesn't help anybody who wants ammunition against the Cardano community. As we're fighting each other, there's people on the outside that are like happy about that because that's what they want. We already have a lot of other chains, a lot of other heads of projects, downplaying what Cardano's building. The last thing that we want to do is internally, corroborate that or give them the idea that they are right. So I think this is the time that we have to come together. If those tough conversations need to be had, they need to be had offline, not in front of everybody. And then once the facts are established, then you can share that with the public.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. And we'll probably wrap up in around that. And look, if people have questions, you should be allowed to ask your questions without it being considered FUD or without it being considered fact. People look at certain statements and take them as the fact without, as you say, doing your own due diligence, finding out what the reality is underneath it. And it's very hard to change that. Once you put out a statement you think is correct and then people take that as fact, then that becomes known as this is the way things are. And it's very hard to change people's first impression of certain things. So it's all part of do your own research on things, find out, and find people you trust, but never take one person's story of what it is. Always have a look around, have a few people. Generally, when it comes to technical stuff, there's a few people that if there's a technical discussion going on, I go and I look for their responses to it, or people that I've trusted for a long time now, look at what their input is on it and start to form my own opinions based on that then, or even go and have a discussion with people before I would even get involved in a conversation, because I don't want to be one that's putting out the wrong stuff either. But Farid, thanks for your time today. We went through lots of different stuff as usual, World Mobile, everything that's going on with them, NFTxLV. I have a few notes here, projects I need to go and have a look at. And especially when you're not feeling 100%, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to jump on and speak. It's always a pleasure. Even this, stream went by much faster than anticipated. I was a little bit nervous about how I was going to sound and all that, but hopefully everything on your end wasn't too bad. Again, I always look forward to these, and I look forward to, potentially coming back on after the Cardano Summit. Thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, cheers, man. We'll talk soon.